This happened 2 summers ago in the hometown of the Cowboys. I'm aware of human trafficking in this city. I once had a coworker pulled out of work and put in a safe house by the FBI because she finally decided to report her family. However, I never thought traffickers would randomly snatch people. In all the stories I had heard, they used drugs or coercion. 2 summers ago, I was cycling to a smoke shop. It was a bit out of my way in a neighborhood that wasn't great, but I felt confident. It was daytime, and I rode all over the city, so I knew the area. At the time, I was 24 years old, short and had short pink hair, but I always thought of myself as too intimidating to kidnap. I forgot that even though I'm a veteran, I'm also a short white woman. As I pulled up to a crosswalk and waited for the light to change, 2 Hispanic men started catcalling me from a windowless white van. The van had no identification or stickers. Even the way they yelled at me was strange. It wasn't the usual nice rack or let me screw you type of locker room nonsense. Instead, they were talking to each other, then yelling through a cracked window things like, "We're gonna get you and you're next." It felt off, like they were excited. I flipped them off and rode away thinking that was the end of it. Over a mile later, I was just a block away from my destination. To set the scene, there was a massive empty lot, really more like 2 lots on my right. That was the side I was riding down. On my left, there was the back fence of an old, likely abandoned house. The area was mostly drifters or elderly people living in poverty, with a few trap houses scattered around. No one else was visible, and even if they had seen anything, they likely wouldn't have said a word for their own safety. As I pedaled along, my music album ended. I thought, I'm almost there, I won't stop to fumble with my phone now. That decision saved my life. As I had that thought, a white van pulled up on my left, staying just within my peripheral vision. They revved the engine a few times, trying to spook me, but something told me not to react. I decided not to let them know I'd noticed. Acting like my music was still playing, I pedaled a little faster. Up ahead, there was a brick wall on my left and a tall tree just beyond it, followed by a quick alley entrance. Suddenly, they punched the gas and pulled in front of me, stopping next to the brick wall. They were trying to corner me, forcing me to ride between their door and the wall. This all happened in maybe 7 seconds. Surprisingly, I didn't feel panic. I didn't register fear, sweat, or anything. It was as if someone much calmer took over my body and said, "Nope." Without thinking, I instantly crossed the street. I didn't even realize why I was doing it until later. As I pedaled past their other side, I noticed that this was the same van from earlier, but now it had a magnetic sign on the side, claiming it was for window repair. The sign looked too small and cheap to be legitimate, with no contact information, just a generic name. I kept glancing back and saw no one in the front seat, but there was movement behind the seats. The men were in the back by the door. They had planned to drag me off my bike and do God knows what. Once I passed them, they scrambled into the front seat and sped off, burning rubber as they pulled away. I reached the store safely, but still hate myself for not taking down the license plate. Not that it would have mattered, they probably switched it out later. I knew I had almost been kidnapped, killed, or worse, but it wasn't until I told the story to someone from Mexico that I realized these were traffickers. They told me it sounded disturbingly familiar, and that this kind of thing happens all the time. I have no family and my roommates are just roommates. If they had succeeded, I would have been gone for 3 to 7 days before anyone even realized something was wrong. By then, people would have just known I left on my bike and disappeared. I would have been across the border or dead before anyone even knew I was missing. To the human traffickers, let's not meet. A few years ago, I was sent to Korea from my university. They told me I had to go somewhere in Asia for my major, and my friend had really talked up Korea to me. I didn't know much about it, but I thought, what the hell, and embarked on a semester-long trip. I had only had one serious boyfriend in my life, and we had broken up a few months before. I also don't enjoy one-night stands and wasn't interested in the guys at the clubs in Seoul. But I still wanted some kind of romantic experience, so my friend recommended I use a dating app to meet English-speaking Koreans. This way I could meet someone and experience the local dating culture. I thought, I'm young, why not? I was just so eager to have new experiences. Maybe it sounds dumb to try dating in a foreign country, but eventually it worked out for me. Just not the first date. I met him on the dating app about 3 weeks after arriving in Seoul. Let's call him Tim. At the time, I didn't know the city or culture well, and I was a bit naive. Tim seemed nice and really wanted to meet up. I should have asked more questions and noticed that he wasn't sharing much about himself. Tim was a bit older than me, but he claimed to be a college student. I assumed he'd done his military service since all men in Korea have to and had returned to school. We talked for a bit and decided to meet for a tea date near my school. He wanted to come to my dorm to pick me up, but I lived in an all-women's dorm and didn't want him to know where I lived since we were still strangers. So I insisted we meet at the main town center near the subway. He really didn't like this idea, which looking back was a red flag. But eventually I insisted. The night of the date, I waited for over an hour. He was very late. Tim weirdly claimed he just wanted to make me wait. I thought he was joking and sent him a laughing emoji, assuming he was just lost. When he finally arrived, he was much smaller than I had imagined, but a man's height has never been important to me. He was also quite thin. Maybe I let my guard down because I didn't see him as physically threatening, which turned out to be a mistake. Right off the bat, he was way too touchy with me and kept breathing heavily and creepily. I was so put off by his demeanor. I'm usually very tolerant with different personality types, but this was just odd to me. I had been told that Korean men were usually polite and not overly touchy on the first date. He was also dressed strangely, like he was in business attire for a date. But I thought maybe it was just a Korean thing. Again, I was naive and didn't know much about the culture. Then the first thing he said to me was, "You're not as white as I thought you were." I thought it might have been a translation error, but his English was near perfect. So I asked for clarification and he explained what he meant. "I thought you would be more white. Your skin is darker than I thought. And your eyes aren't as green. Are you pure European?" Now I was officially weirded out. First of all, I'm pretty much as white as you can get. I'm Irish and Scandinavian, so I'm very pale. The idea that I could possibly be any whiter was funny. And why did he care about my skin color in the first place? Why was he bringing it up? He said about 3 times during the date that he wished I had greener eyes. Every time I would just reply, "Well, maybe my online photos made me look brighter," and brush it off, assuming he was just nervous and trying to start a conversation. Isn't it funny how you make up excuses for people when you're panicking? When we got to the tea place, I tried to order a simple raspberry tea, but he stopped me and insisted I had to try a special tea. I thought it was strange that he wanted to choose my tea for me, but I brushed it off again. He really insisted that I only drink this particular type of tea, so I just agreed. These small details would become much stranger later. After tea, he asked if we could walk around my school. It was dark, but the school was well lit, so I agreed. As we walked around, he would randomly stop and grab me for long hugs. At first, I let it happen, but then I started stopping him. He kept trying, though, grabbing me and breathing heavily into my neck. It was so awkward. He also refused to tell me anything personal about himself. I asked a ton of questions, desperately trying to distract from the awkwardness of his constant grabbing and to get to know him better. But he would never tell me anything. At one point he said, "I'm a mysterious man, like something from a movie." He also said I looked so much like his favorite movie character. I asked who, but he said I would have to figure it out on my own. Finally he said, "I want to go to a dark area," and in my head I screamed hell no. At this point I just wanted the date to be over. Somehow he knew there was a wooded area behind my campus and he kept insisting we go there. I said no and told him I wanted to stay near the main campus in town, but he kept pushing. Then he grabbed my arm and started dragging me toward the wooded area. He said, "I can't let anyone see," and I started to panic. I finally managed to rip my arm away and demanded we go back to the main road immediately. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't yell for help or get angry. Maybe I was too scared. Instead, I just started walking quickly back to the main road, and he followed me. We ended up in front of a hospital near the center of town, and I told him it was time for him to leave. I made up some excuse, and he started pleading with me to stay. I told him we could meet the next day, which was a lie, and that I would message him. I just wanted to get away. I pretended everything was okay, hoping he would leave. Suddenly, I thought he was leaning in to kiss me, and I immediately panicked. Oh God, no. But it was so much worse. Instead, I felt pain in my face. It took me a second to realize that he was biting my face. It wasn't like a playful nibble, it was like a dog bite. He leaned his head sideways and bit down hard on my nose and cheek. I screamed and pushed him away. His face looked so creepy and I didn't even have time to process what he had done. Instead, I just ran. I sprinted up the sidewalk until I saw a convenience store on my right. I darted inside, ran to the back of the store and bent down, crying. The man who owned the store started yelling at me, but I couldn't explain what had happened. I just begged him in English to let me stay. Eventually, I bought a popsicle so I could stick around. I wish I had learned some Korean by that point. It would have helped so much. Thankfully, Tim didn't follow me. I cautiously peered outside the store and didn't see him anywhere. I texted a friend and waited for them to pick me up and take me back to my dorm. On the way back, I messaged Tim one last time. I told him to stay away from me, called him a creep, told him he shouldn't bite women, and said I would go to the police if he ever came near me again. Then I blocked him. For weeks after that, I was terrified to walk around my school area. I kept worrying he'd find me somehow. I'm so thankful I never let him pick me up at my dorm. When I told my mom what had happened, she interrupted me and asked, "Wait, what did he ask you? What exactly did he say?" She put the pieces together and realized all the weird things he did. His fixation on my appearance, the tea he insisted I drink, the way he dressed, and even the random lines he used matched details from the 50 Shades of Grey books and movies. At first, I thought she was overthinking it, but when she explained, it all made sense. She'd recently seen the movie and recognized the patterns. My mom thinks he picked me because I reminded him of the main character in those stories and he wanted to act out some creepy fantasy. It also explains why he was so focused on dominating me, especially with the biting. Even if it wasn't related to the books, I later learned that some creeps specifically target foreign women as some kind of trophy. There's even a term for it, riding the white horse or something along those lines. On a happier note, this bad experience didn't stop me from living my life. I eventually met someone else in Korea, and we ended up falling in love. We even did the whole long-distance relationship thing. And now I'm living in Korea, studying and working. We're planning to get married soon. As for Tim, let's not meet. It's been years, but I would still kick your ass if I ever saw you again. And trust me, I won't need to bite. So, I met this friend online the summer before my junior year of high school. I was 16. His name was Flip. We clicked pretty instantly. Our senses of humor matched up, and I felt like we were really good friends. He was a guy and I was a girl, but I never really had romantic feelings for him. Also, I was in a relationship. When I was 16, he was 19. I could tell he had romantic feelings, and he let me know 6 months into our friendship that he loved me. We didn't really have a stable friendship because he would often flip out and go extended periods without talking to me. He told me it was because he couldn't bear to talk to me knowing we can't be together, because I was dating someone. But I now know that it was more of a control thing. He wanted to stop talking to me to make me feel like I was missing something. He really hated women. He really disliked women and felt like most of them were just promiscuous. He told me he felt like I was different, that I was the only true woman he had ever met. Looking back, that was a big red flag. I was young and didn't really think much of it. Our friendship was only online, through iMessages and FaceTime. When he went on these tangents where he would abruptly stop talking to me, he would go on Twitter and make offensive, demonizing tweets about me to other people. Just awful stuff. When he came back, I would ignore it because he would go back to being funny and nice. Please stay with me as I build up to our in-person meeting. He also had a habit of lashing out at people, taking revenge, and just making others feel terrible for fun. Another red flag, but I thought I was special in that he really cared about me and would never do anything like that to me. I remember leading up to my 18th birthday, him being 21 by this point. He said to me, "When you turn 18, you are sending me intimate pictures. You don't get to say no." I brushed it off because I knew I wouldn't, but it was clear that there was an element of him wanting to dominate. Anyway, fast forward 2 years later. I'm now 18 and a freshman in college. In October, I broke up with my boyfriend, the same one I had when I was 16, and Flip took that as an opportunity. He would tell me he couldn't bear not seeing me and that basically we had to meet or it was all over. Now, I didn't really have romantic feelings for him. My love for him was platonic, but I figured, I'll try the romance. I'll try to love him romantically. I can't lose him. So I impulsively bought a plane ticket to where he lives in December. My parents had no idea, and to this day, they still don't. I was going to go on a Friday and come back on a Monday. The college I attend is in a city with an airport, so it was easy to just take an Uber to the airport. The romance I was trying to project felt real, and I genuinely felt like I loved him romantically. I was finally going to meet the guy I thought I loved. Now, leading up to the flight about 1 to 2 weeks before, I started getting cold feet. I was questioning the legitimacy of my feelings and began getting close to a guy at a neighboring university. I started catching feelings for him and kissed him a day before my flight. At that point, I had already decided I didn't want to pursue Flip romantically. I figured, hey, we've been friends for 2 years. When I get there, I'll tell him I only want to stay friends. Yeah, he'll be upset, but I'm sure our friendship is worth more than that. And we'll be able to have a nice, enjoyable time together. How naive I was. I decided to go on the trip anyway, thinking that maybe seeing him would reignite that spark. Upon arrival, I realized I did not love him and I was no longer attracted to him. Regardless, he was a close friend of mine for a very long time, and whether I felt a romantic connection or not, I wanted to meet him for the sake of meeting him, just as I would want to meet any internet friend. It was time for the flight. It was very early and I remember sitting on the plane, contemplating just walking out. I really wanted to leave and not return. I should have listened to my gut. I arrive and I step outside the terminal. I see him sitting in his car just staring at me with a very malicious, piercing stare. After a few moments, he gets out of the car. He looks different. It's strange because we had FaceTimed and I had seen pictures of him, but he just looks different, kind of creepier. We hug and then sit in the car. It's awkward. I feel awkward. We make small talk and awkward jokes, and in that moment, I wanted to be back in my dorm. We go back to his apartment and we head up to his room. We smoke some weed and I lay down on his bed to sleep. When I wake up, he's spooning me and trying to touch me inappropriately. I take his hands off and tell him to stop. I sit up and basically unload about how I don't want him romantically, only as a friend. He starts crying, begging me to tell him that I love him. I tell him I can't do that. He stands up still crying and goes to the bathroom where he starts lighting things on fire. It smells like burning paper in the room now. He comes out, acting normally, and just sits at his computer, playing games without talking to me. The rest of the trip was a combination of him being kind and normal, then completely evil. Here are some of the things he did or said during the 3 days. He made jokes about me dying. He would pretend to hit me, lunging at me and getting close enough to watch as I flinched. He told me he almost sent a Snapchat of me to my mom with the geotag of his town so I would get in trouble. He told me he almost made me sleep in the car one night. He said that one night while I was sleeping, he walked over to me and started farting on me. This one was just disgusting. He kept telling me to shut the hell up when I would speak or ask questions. He also did it multiple times in front of his roommates. He was trying to touch me in bed and I kept pushing his hands away. He would keep trying and say things like, "I know you want it, you're just holding back." He called me an idiot whenever I asked questions. He served me spaghetti and told me he purposely used moldy spaghetti sauce, hoping I would get sick. He told me he was going to make me miss my flight home. He said he planned to drive in the opposite direction of the airport and drop me off in the middle of nowhere. Basically, I kept my cool. When he would say these things, I would nod, agree, and laugh with him. I was terrified and wanted nothing more than to leave, so I kept my calm and tried not to upset him. Monday rolls around and my flight isn't until 8 p.m. Around 11 a.m., he goes downstairs to leave, and during that time I pack my bag and leave without him knowing. My plan was to run to the nearest shopping plaza and then take an Uber to the airport from there. I wasn't about to take an Uber from his house. I'm almost at the end of the street feeling free when I feel 2 arms wrap around me from behind. He's hugging me, mumbling something into my ear, then turns around and sprints back to his apartment. I ran to the shopping plaza, called an Uber, and felt such relief in that moment. I felt like I was free. I waited at the airport for 8 hours with nothing to do, but it was better than being at his place. Looking back, I feel like an idiot. I should have gone to a hotel and I probably should have left earlier. But I was a broke college student and I was already terrified being there without my parents' knowledge. After I left, I blocked him on every social media platform I had, including LinkedIn. He still tries to contact me regularly for 4 months. But thankfully, I never told him my address or any other personal information. So online friend of 2 years, let's not meet again. In one of my previous encounters shared here, I mentioned a drug house at the end of my street. I will likely refer to it again in the future, so I thought I should write about it. This house has been in operation on and off for the last several years. The previous owner and operator passed away, and a family member took over. I live in a small town with about 8,000 people. It's a country town, but very beautiful, and the people here are generally good. My neighborhood is one where everyone knows each other. New neighbors receive welcome gifts, and we even have a community Facebook page for reporting suspicious activities. Every other month we hold meetings to discuss issues, like the drug house, for example. We're pretty tightly knit out here. A few years ago, under mysterious circumstances, a small house at the end of my street was taken over by a drug dealer who attracted all sorts of strange people. We've been told by our local police department to report any suspicious activity. They've been to the drug house multiple times, made arrests, but seem unable to shut it down for good for some reason. One night, while driving home from work just past midnight, I saw a man sitting on my front lawn with his legs spread out and a bicycle next to him. Startled, I was about to ask if he was okay when I got a good look at his face. He had blood dripping down his forehead, and he was grinning ear to ear, giggling uncontrollably. I told him he needed to leave or I would call the police. He replied, "It's too late," got up and rode away on his bike. I routinely see extremely creepy-looking people walking on the side of the road, people dancing and others riding bikes. Many of my neighbors have had their homes and cars broken into, and my parents' van has been broken into as well. One morning, I got a text from my mother asking if my girlfriend had sat in her car and smoked. I thought this was an odd question, and I was kind of offended as my girlfriend is a very considerate person. Also, she doesn't smoke cigarettes, which my mom found in the car. Someone had broken into her van, smoked an entire pack of cigarettes, and put them out in various places. They must have just left when my mom went out to the car as the seat was still warm and a cigarette was still smoldering. Nothing was missing, but someone had used my mom's car to smoke in. We found addicts stealing mail and packages from my neighbors' front porches. And I've seen drugs change hands multiple times. I knew a guy from school, someone I'd known since we were 5 years old, who ended up buying from the drug house and dealing himself for a while before dying from a drug overdose. I've recognized several people going in and out of that house. By far the creepiest people I've encountered were the ones most active 2 years ago. They terrorized not just my neighborhood, but several others for blocks without ever getting caught. They ultimately disappeared after their latest act made the news. It started out weird but non-threatening. My neighbors' security cameras would catch them rearranging their plants or just stumbling through people's yards, seemingly in a haze. Sometimes they'd lay down in someone's yard and just look up at the sky and talk to each other. Then they started breaking into people's houses. One thing this group of 3 men had in common was that they all wore white hoodies and were good at hiding their faces, so none of the cameras could capture their identities. They also parked their car a block or 2 away from wherever they were. Every time they did something new, surveillance footage was posted to my neighborhood's Facebook group. It was chilling to watch them occasionally roll through my property, but even more disturbing to see them on other people's properties, sometimes right next to their bedroom windows. One video showed them just watching my neighbors sleep through their window for almost an hour. Several miles away, a family with a lot of surveillance cameras got a shock when one of them randomly checked their security footage from the night before. He heard a noise, and although he didn't expect to find anything, he just wanted peace of mind. What he found was that these men in white had been stalking his family. There were multiple video clips of them moving around the property and peering through windows. But something was different this time. They all had guns. Not only that, but they left enough zip ties for each person in the house, as if they knew how many people lived there. At one point in one of the videos, they looked at the cameras, realized they were being recorded, and left. That was the last we saw of them. The news reported on it, and I think they just got too spooked to try anything again, at least not for a long while. Anyways, that's the drug house. I apologize if this encounter is incoherent or poorly formatted. There is so much I could talk about just regarding that drug house, with so many encounters involving the many individuals I've seen coming and going from there. I could probably post a new story about it once a month and be set for the year. I will refer to this drug house in the future, but if you follow me at all, you'll know exactly what having that in the area is like for me and many of my neighbors. I started texting someone I met on a dating app. As soon as we moved the conversation to texting, they made it very explicit, turning the conversation into an 18+1. I wasn't playing into it, as I was currently at a family Christmas party, around 2 p.m. He started getting upset, asking if his magic wand wasn't good enough. He sent more and more photos trying to get me to respond. But since I was at a family event, which he knew, I didn't think it was the right time or place to look at any of his texts. Before I stopped opening his messages, he felt the need to ask me if his photos got me going. When I told him that I wasn't even thinking about or looking at the photos because I was with family and holding my 5-month-old nephew, he replied with, "So, you can still be wet." I was shocked. When I got home, I decided to take a bath because it had been a long and rough day. He started blowing up my phone, asking where I had gone and if I was finally home yet. I had told him I was busy and might not reply until later in the night. By this point, I had known him for only 5 hours. He asked me what I was thinking about after I got home, around 9 p.m., and I told him sleep, to be honest. He didn't like my reply and asked why I wasn't thinking about the photos he sent and how I couldn't just go back and look at them. This guy was constantly provocative with me, and I turned him down many times. I told him I was upset due to a recent breakup and wasn't looking for hookups, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept spamming my phone with texts and calling me even when I told him I was heading to bed. I was drinking that night to unwind after a long day spent with family. He woke me up, questioning why I wasn't talking to him because he wanted to talk to me and thought I should be available for him. I told him I was sleeping and didn't want to talk. This man then asked, "Aren't you drunk? Shouldn't you be in the mood?" I couldn't believe it. I ended up hanging up on him and ignoring his messages until the morning. I didn't reply until later in the afternoon, and by this time, another guy I had met a few weeks earlier asked me out on a date. I, of course, said yes and had a great time. We drank at his place and played some games. It got late and we were both tipsy from the shots, so I decided to stay at his place for the night, since I didn't want to drive. At 3 a.m., while I was lying next to my date, the guy from the dating app called. Half asleep, I picked up the phone and said, "Hello." He called to tell me that he was at my apartment complex and wanted me to let him in so we could congregate. I was confused, so I asked how he knew where I lived. He told me he found it through Facebook and some of my family members' pages that I was tagged in. I assume he saw a post my mom made when I moved in 2 years ago, with the apartment sign in the background of the photo. I never told him my last name. I freaked out and woke up my date, letting him know what was going on. He drove me back to my place, but we didn't go directly to my door. We looked around and eventually found the car he was in. We drove by slowly and I wrote down the license plate number. I called the local sheriff's office to let them know what was happening, so they could send an officer to ask the guy to leave the property. After he was gone, my date waited with me for an hour to make sure he wasn't coming back. We then headed back to his place to sleep for the rest of the night. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. I woke up to a few more texts from a new number I didn't have saved as his was blocked. The messages were from him, asking why I didn't give him a chance. He said I was perfect, but had let my emotions get in the way of what we could have had. He also told me I better not lose my chance at being with someone like him. He thought his 9-inch magic wand was God's gift to the earth and that if I didn't take this opportunity now, I would live the rest of my life wondering what real magic felt like. I had no words for this person. I was stunned. How had someone I didn't even know for 24 hours turned into this? I was seriously creeped out. I told him more than once to leave me alone and that I was with someone else. He asked why I picked a stranger over him, as if he wasn't also a stranger just the day before. He said it was wrong of him to act that way, but then proceeded to act the exact same way. His last text to me was, "No wonder you're still single." Yeah, man, no wonder I'm still single. I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I moved in with them because my sister was in college and my parents were divorced. They lived in an old bungalow-style house, one story with stairs that led directly up to the attic. The attic wasn't really used. We just stored things up there. It was too hot and stuffy and the single window didn't help. The attic had old creaky wooden floors, and I remember having to polish them with a coconut shell, because that's how we do it here in the Philippines. My grandparents were very traditional. My room was near the stairs leading up to the attic. When I opened my door, I would immediately face the stairs. I hated that every time I left my room I always expected something to crawl down from the attic. One night my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport. Because of the heavy traffic, they left at 7 p.m., and they wouldn't be back until about 5 a.m. So a 14-year-old girl was left alone at home. I told them I'd be fine. We lived in a gated community. There were plenty of guard dogs and everything would be okay. Or so I thought. Before they left, we already had dinner, so I was stuck cleaning the dishes. While doing that, I heard a bunch of dogs barking from the neighbors. I didn't think much of it because the dogs always did that. When I finished cleaning, I made sure to lock all the doors and windows and turn off all the lights before heading to bed. When I entered my room, everything looked normal. My anime posters were on the wall, my closet was untouched, and my bed was next to the barred tinted windows. The windows were tinted because my grandparents didn't want anyone peeking into a young girl's room. The bars were there because my uncle, who used to use the room, would sneak out through the window to go to parties. This was my grandparents' solution. Nothing seemed out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal, until I turned off the lights. As soon as I turned off the lights, I saw a silhouette of a man illuminated by the streetlights outside. He looked like he had thick curly hair and a skinny build. I thought I was hallucinating. I turned the lights back on and he was gone. I turned the lights off again and he was back. Once more I turned the lights on. He was gone. Lights off again, still gone. I sighed in relief, thinking I was just tricking myself, or maybe something else was casting the shadow. I double-locked my door just to be safe, using both the doorknob lock and a latch lock. Then I tucked myself in. It was hard to fall asleep because the dogs outside, which weren't our dogs but the neighbors, kept barking. I was finally drifting off to sleep when I heard something moving above me, something in the attic. I tried to ignore it, thinking I was just tricking myself again. I hugged my pillow, telling myself, it's just rats. But these rats seemed heavy. They were pushing furniture around. My heart sank when I heard the sounds hurry down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I pulled the blanket over me and waited. I wished my parents had given me a phone, but I didn't have one at the time. I just waited, holding my breath. Suddenly, I heard my doorknob being gently turned. I wanted to vomit when I heard the click, followed by the quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned, but it didn't budge. When the person realized it was locked, they tried to push it. That was when I stood up, shaking. I was just a kid, home alone with no phone, no way to defend myself. All that was saving me was the thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body against the door and locked everything again. I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want him to know I was there. I don't know why he stopped, but he did. I didn't go back to bed. I just sat there at the door waiting. It felt like forever. I heard footsteps go up the stairs, but I stayed sitting still. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. There, outside my window. The shadow was back. I forced myself not to look. All I could think of was, thank God the windows were barred. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I either fell asleep or was too scared to even think straight. All I remember is the next morning, when my family and I were having breakfast. I casually brought it up, saying, I think I heard footsteps in the attic last night. My grandmother scoffed. It's probably just rats. I never brought it up again. I didn't want to worry them. I probably was just imagining things. But I do know this. Our dogs were caged up near the gate, far from my room so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs near my room were the neighbors. Also, there was nothing outside my window that could cast a shadow like a man. And the most terrifying part, the attic window was open. So, there was this one park with a pond in the city I grew up in. It had a nickname, Stalker Lake. I was young then, a freshman in high school, and this was before cell phones were common. Our track team went, following the coach's instruction to meet and run around the path that circled the lake. This pond is located inside a park in the city. It's about a mile in circumference, and I'm going to tell you right now, I was not the best runner on the team. In fact, I was the slowest. The slowest, saddest girl on the track team. The coach warned us about the lake's reputation, even calling it Stalker Lake, and told us to buddy up. I had no buddy. He did not enforce buddies, and I was soon left on my own after the other runners took off. I ran. I tried my best. We were doing 3 loops. I saw people during the first loop. Then I was passed by people on the second loop. By the third loop, my sides were aching and everyone on the team had lapped me and was gone. I was at the half-mile point as far as you can get from the main road. The rest of the area on the far side of the loop around the lake led into more park, which included dense tree growth, brush, bushes, and just generally useless territory. You couldn't see into it well, you couldn't see past it, and there was no way to run through it safely. I got a stitch in my side. I stopped and started to walk. I pressed my hand into my side and must have been visibly tired because of what happened next. I heard a rustle behind me. It was loud. Someone was coming out of the bushes. I started walking faster. Something in me told me not to look. I knew if I looked it would be over. I just knew. I sped up my walking. They did too, not more than a couple of yards behind me. My heart was beating hard now. I started to run. They started to run. I ran faster, they ran faster. I could hear their footsteps right behind me, pounding into the pavement, almost catching up to me. Each time they would pull closer to me, I found the strength to push faster. My adrenaline pulled me forward. I ran. I went into an all-out sprint and maintained it with this person on my heels for the remainder of the loop. I knew if I could just make it to the street, if I could get back near people, I would be okay. I had to. I ran, I heard their breathing. They were that close to me. I didn't look. I knew if I saw his face, and I was sure it was a man from the sound of his breathing, that he would have to catch me because I could identify him. So I didn't look back. I just looked forward and ran. I reached the entrance to the path. I heard a wheeze behind me. I dug my heels in and pushed myself forward. I heard another wheeze and then another. His footsteps stopped. He gasped for air. I ran, letting the wheezing fall into the distance. I ran from there all the way back to my school without looking back. When I reached it, no one from the team was there. No one had waited for me. I got my stuff from my locker and walked home, shaking, terrified, and grateful. At the time, I lived with my grandmother. I think I would have reported it if I had been living with one of my parents, but I didn't want to scare her, so I kept quiet. I wish I hadn't now. Now I know the importance of reporting these things to prevent future incidents. To this day, that lake has a reputation and nothing has been done about it. I feel very lucky for getting away. Lucky that I was fast enough, that the man was slow enough, that I knew to run and not look back. It occurred to me years later that this person was not only attempting to kidnap me, but that he was attempting to kidnap a child. I looked like a child. I did not look mature for my age, and I was a young teen at the time. Now I carry my cell phone and pepper spray, no matter how crazy it makes me look. I also never run on paths. People look for targets on bike and running paths. I prefer to stick to nice crowded streets no matter how gross other people think my sweaty running self is. I recommend the same for everyone else. Also, shame on my coach. Geez Louise, don't tell your girls' team to run at Stalker Lake. Please stay safe, y'all. And to the kidnapper, let's not meet. I hope that was an asthma attack and it got you honestly. When I look back on this story, I can think of 1,000 things I would do differently. And I got really lucky that things weren't much worse. I was 21 and female. I took the subway downtown to a pretty crowded area. When I got off the train, I saw most people walking in a different direction than they usually did at that stop. First mistake, I just continued on to the usual exit alone. It was winter, so even though it was only 6-ish, it was dark when I came up to the street. It was also deserted. This was very strange because the stop was against a major building with a super wide sidewalk and it was normally crowded. I should also mention that this is a major city with more than 2 million people. I realized that the reason no one came out that way was that there was some construction that made it inconvenient to exit that wide sidewalk. You had to walk around the building. I looked at the path in front of me. I could either keep going or go back down into the subway. For some reason, going back down creeped me out. I didn't want to go back down the steps alone. Second mistake, the subway would have had someone in the booth. So I started walking around the building. I saw someone on a bike, maybe a football field length ahead of me. That's normal. But then as the bike got closer, it started slowly going back and forth across the super wide sidewalk. A lot of teenagers bike and skateboard around here. And anyway, it's a super busy street, so even though there is construction, there are a million cars going by. Once I got closer, I could see this was a guy in maybe his 40s or 50s. He looked like he needed a shower and his clothes were worn and dirty. There are a lot of people who are homeless in my city, so it doesn't really send up red flags, except the knowledge that a lot of people on the street can be pretty unpredictable. So this dude gets closer and starts talking to me. In this city, you get catcalled a lot. My go-to is to not respond. This dude, I just said, "Sorry, I'm running late." But the problem was I still had a good amount of the walkway to cover. So he kept biking around me slowly and getting really frantic that he wanted me to call him. He got super worked up and was talking really fast and telling me his beeper number. In 2008, this is also pretty weird. Eventually, he gets off the bike. I'm alone with this dude who was going off the rails. There is still no one on the sidewalk within a block of us. This is the part where I stopped being rational. Some of you might be familiar with the feeling of freezing when you are being threatened. By this point in my life, I had already been assaulted, and a lot of my reaction was driven by not wanting to make this dude angry. So I finally talked to him and said again, "I'm sorry I can't stop. I'm running late and people are waiting for me." He was begging me to write down the beeper number. I said no and I was sorry. So he said something like, "At least shake my hand." What did I do? I shook his hand like an idiot. He pulled me into a bear hug and started sloppy kissing my face and neck. My face was turned away, so it was a weird cheek slap. I didn't even scream. I tried to push him away but gave up pretty quickly. Again, I had been assaulted before and my mind was sort of frozen, and thinking if I didn't make him too mad, he might not hurt me too much. Right away, I think only a few seconds really after he pulled me in, I heard someone yelling behind me. He let go and I started to bolt. I looked back and it was a bike cop. I slowed down but kept sort of jogging away. The cop asked him if he knew me and for ID. Then the cop called out asking if I knew him. I called out no and just kept running. I didn't feel anything until I saw my friend who was waiting at another train station like 2 blocks away. She was coming from another area and we agreed to meet at the station and thought it would be safer if we walked together to the bar we were going to. As soon as I saw her, I felt so dirty and just said, "I need to wash my face." Sometimes I wish I could find that bike cop and thank him, but I don't know anything about him, including what he looked like. This happened shortly before weed was legalized in Germany. In Berlin, regulations were already quite loose. As long as you didn't explicitly bother anyone, you usually wouldn't get arrested for smoking in public. I've been smoking daily for years. I know it's not great, but that's beside the point. So I can function pretty well while stoned. However, I almost never smoke in public, partly to avoid trouble, but mostly because I enjoy the comfort of my own home. One late night around 3 a.m., I was chilling online with friends ready to call it a day. I wanted to relax with a joint and one of my favorite shows, but unfortunately I had no snacks left. Determined to end the night with a proper munchie session, I decided to hit up a nearby Spotty, a small convenience store similar to a 7-Eleven. At that hour, only the sketchiest ones are still open, often operating illegally. I grabbed my coat and keys but stopped short before leaving. Why not add a little joy to this cold walk? I thought, rolling a small joint. I lit it as I stepped outside, braving the freezing breeze. The area I live in is pretty rough, mostly foreign residents, many from Arabic countries. Poor integration has led to crime and violence being all too common. Even so, I was in good spirits as I strolled toward the flickering neon sign. Just one more intersection to go. A group of men stood at the corner. They looked Middle Eastern, a bit older than me, and watched me as I walked by. It felt normal. Nothing to worry about, I thought, already a little high. I crossed the street without giving them much thought. Then I heard a voice call out, "Routine ID check, please show me your identification." My heart sank. Of course, this has to happen the one time I smoke in public, I thought, turning to face the police. Only they weren't police. It was the group from the intersection now slowly approaching me. "Routine ID check, please show me your ID. We're undercover cops," one of them said with a smug grin. I froze. The fact that they weren't cops became clear when, despite their demand, none of them reached for any identification. "You know smoking weed is illegal, don't you?" the man continued. His pupils were enormous, like saucers. It was obvious that these guys had no authority whatsoever. They began circling me. "Show us what's in your pockets," the leader demanded. So it's a robbery, I thought. As long as I don't resist, maybe I'll only lose my phone and the few bills I brought for snacks. Then a wave of dread hit me. My weekly tips, about 300 euros in cash, were also in my pocket. I had forgotten to deposit it earlier. Losing that money would crush my tight budget for the month. What now? As I slowly reached into my pocket, the leader pressed me. "What's taking so long?" I pulled out an old pack of gum and some broken headphones, hoping to satisfy them. "Where's your wallet?" "I need your ID," he insisted. Still fumbling, too stubborn and stupid to hand over my tips, I inadvertently revealed something that shocked even me, the glint of a Glock tucked into his belt. Knives and metal rods are typical weapons here, but a gun? That was insane, even by local standards. German gun laws are incredibly strict. My adrenaline spiked. Slowly, I pulled out the 5 euros bill I'd planned to use for snacks, trying to keep my expression neutral. "You've got no wallet," he growled, his face darkening. My brain screamed at me to do something, anything, before this escalated further. Then, a desperate thought flashed through my mind. The Arabs in this area had a well-known fear of Russians, with frequent clashes between the two groups. Maybe, just maybe, I could use this. In a heavy Russian accent, I stammered, "My friends have my wallet. They're coming soon, we meet here." To my surprise, their poor English comprehension worked in my favor. They exchanged glances, muttering in German, and decided to wait. I forced myself to look confused, maintaining the bluff. It worked. Their effort to translate or figure me out must have seemed too much trouble. The leader finally pointed at my 5 euros bill. "All right then, you get us something to drink." Reluctantly, I followed them into the spotty. They grabbed a 6-pack of Coke and I paid, heart pounding. I was certain this wasn't over, that they'd either search me themselves or retaliate when my non-existent friends didn't show up. But then just like that, they left. No violence, no further questions, nothing. I stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Looking back, I can't believe I bluffed in such a dangerous situation. It could have been my last day on Earth, all over 300 euros. I've learned my lesson. These days, I avoid walking around late at night when the streets are empty. And to those guys from that night, let's not meet again. Ever. When I was about 13, my aunt and uncle used to have a seasonal campsite at a small lake, about 3 hours away from our town. It wasn't fancy, but it was a cheap summer vacation spot, and my whole family used to go there a lot. I often brought my friend, let's call her Kay, to stay with us, since I was a lonely only child and valued the company. Since the campground was so small, especially the seasonal sites, it really felt like home. We knew many people at the lake by name, and they knew us too. Most of the campground staff had gotten used to Kay and I riding our bikes around, eating ice cream, and playing with the frogs by the water, and they were all very friendly to us. Like I said, it felt like home. It's also worth mentioning that both Kay and I grew up in a very small Canadian town, a place where everyone waves when you drive by, no one locks their doors, and everyone is your friend. One day, we were by the water around sunset. We were sitting on the dock, dipping our toes in the water and about to head back to our campsite for supper. We were exhausted from a day of roasting in the sun, biking, and catching frogs. A disheveled man, maybe 40 or 50 years old, approached the dock behind us. Being the friendly young rural girls we were, we waved hello and exchanged some pleasantries. He continued to approach us, chatting politely about the weather and other small talk. He was wearing a stained beer t-shirt, the kind you used to get for free in a box of beer in the early 2000s, and dirty jeans. He had straggly, greasy hair and was missing a tooth. This might immediately set off red flags for you, but again, being from a small town, this guy looked like half of my dad's side of the family, so neither of us was fazed. During the conversation, he sat down beside me on the dock, dipping his feet in the water next to ours. He continued chatting, asking about what we had been doing that day, where our campsite was, and who our parents were, stuff like that. He said he knew my parents and that they were friends. We probably should have been smarter about continuing to talk to him, but as an only child, I had always felt comfortable chatting with adults and didn't think twice about it. Plus, he knew my parents. What could go wrong? Eventually, he started asking us about boating. He pointed to a boat off the dock, a fancy one with a gold glittery finish, and asked if we liked it. We did. He told us that it was his boat and that it was the fastest and coolest on the lake. He asked if we had ever been to any of the secret islands on the lake. We said no. I remember thinking it was odd since the lake wasn't that large or impressive, so a secret island seemed strange and really tempting. He told us he owned one of the islands and its name was Zeke. He asked if we wanted to go to Zeke with him. We hesitated, but ultimately we wanted to go for a boat ride. By now the sun was a dim orange glow slipping into the horizon. We were just getting up to go toward the boat when my uncle came down the hill to the lake in his truck. He honked the horn and yelled for us to get in the truck. We were supposed to be home by dark, and we were in trouble. He threw our bikes in the truck bed and we climbed in. My uncle asked us who the man we had been talking to was. We told him it was some guy who knew our parents. We told him he was going to take us to a secret island on his cool boat. When Kay pointed out the boat to my uncle, he told us that boat belonged to Phil, the owner of the convenience store at the lake. He then lectured us about why agreeing to go on a boat ride with a perfect stranger was a bad idea. He confirmed my suspicion that there were no islands on the small lake. We both started to feel kind of freaked out, which only grew worse when we told our parents about the man and they were sure they didn't know him. My mom lectured us and said he probably wanted to wear our skin like a mask. Creepy man at the lake, let's not meet.